Karma, doing, comes from the root kri, to act. So they say, though, that the roots of Sanskrit are not simply the roots of a language, they're the roots of life. Because in another sense, altogether, you see, you create the world by the word. And this is something that we're not very conscious of. It's the way you think that determines your basic reactions to what happens. In the words of Shakespeare, there is nothing either good or ill, but thinking makes it so. Thinking is talking to yourself inside your head. And we, through this, build up all sorts of weird notions. We say, for example, well, one day you'll have to die. Have to? What's the sense? What's the emotional content of saying you'll have to die? It means it's going to be something imposed upon you against your will. So it's put in this passive mood. Have to. You'll be compelled to die. But I can't be compelled to die unless I'm fighting it. Supposing I want to die. Supposing I commit suicide. Or supposing we look at it all in another way and say, when I get a disease and die as a result of it, getting a disease is something I do, just as much as taking a walk. Only we've got our thoughts arranged so that we say, you ought not to get a disease, even if it's just plain old age. Somehow you ought not to do that. You ought to go on. And therefore, you can't say, when death comes about, well, to put it in the words of Robert Louis Stevenson, I laid me down with a will. Because we've got this hang-up about life being divided into two parts. Things that we do, on the one hand, and things that happen to us on the other. And Buddhists say, what happens to you is your karma. And people don't readily understand that. They think my karma, something awful happened to me because of something bad I did in my last life. And therefore, I've got bad karma. Karma simply means your doing, your action. So that when something that happens to me is called my karma, it means that it's your own doing. And if you recognize that it's your own doing, it's never bad karma. It's only bad karma if you refuse to admit that it's your own doing and merely blame someone or something else that it's something that happened to you. Now I've digressed a little because what I was getting at was the meaning of a law of nature. Laws of nature were taken over. The idea of the law of nature was taken over by Western science from this ancient magical notion of the Word of God, the commandment of God, being the foundation for everything that happens in the world. But now, today, in Western 20th century science, there is an entirely new idea of the law of nature. The laws of nature are not things that exist in any real sense, which phenomena like the motion of stars or the behavior of animals and rocks, they're not phenomena which these things obey. The universe is doing its stuff. But because we have a certain kind of structure and brain, we want to make sense of it. And therefore, we find various ways of understanding the world by the principle of regularity. Now what's that? Let's take a clock. A clock ticks regularly. But the world does not tick regularly. Inconveniently enough, the sun does not have the earth go round it in a neat 360 days. This has always irritated calendar makers. How to make a rational calendar? There is no solution, because the rotations of the earth upon its own axis do not neatly synchronize with its rotation around the sun. There's always something a little odd about it. So what we do is we superimpose over this rather odd elliptical path the ideal figure of a circle with its 360 degrees. Now that is also like putting a ruler along a piece of wood and saying this piece of wood can be cut to 12 inches. Now there are no inches in the wood. Inches are a method, a technique that human beings have invented for measuring things. And so we can cut out of a piece of cloth or a trunk of a tree so many feet. Well, originally, it's simply comparing the trunk with us by putting our feet over it one after another and saying it's so many feet long. Or so many spans when you stretch out the hand. This is the fundamental idea of measurement, and the inch is, of course, one joint. Not your kind of joint. And so this comparison of man's body and its regular shape, you see, 10 fingers on either side, 5 fingers on either side makes 10, 5 toes on either side makes 10. And so by stretching ourselves out, as it were, against nature, we measured it. And the idea of measurement is the same idea as the idea of the law of nature. A law of nature is exactly the same kind of thing as a ruler, or a hammer, or a saw. It is a way of thinking which enables us to control our environment. By observing regularities, and then by making a calculus, which is a process really of betting. Will it be regular next time? And the odds are that it may be. If it's done it once this way, it's likely to do it again that way. So in this way, you predict eclipses of the sun. You predict the phases of the moon. You measure them. You count it, how it went, how often it did it like this, how often it did it like that. And you say, well, it keeps on doing it. And you think, wow, this is fascinating. It seems to obey me, because now I can tell you any time it's going to come up. And if the other people around haven't figured it out, they think I'm magic, because I'm going to say to them, the moon is going to change at such and such a time. So many days from now it's going to have a different shape. They'll say, my God, he was right. And they'll think I'm making it happen, because I can do that. And so I get a rather privileged position, because I could predict. But that's the basic idea, you see, of the law of nature. The law of nature is a human network, like the lines of celestial latitude and longitude. They don't exist in the heavens, but we project them on the sky in order to measure the positions of the stars. Because the stars are scattered in a very confusing way. And just try and remember that mess and figure it out. So the clever ones, you see, just said, look at it through a network, a spherical network. Then you can number all the squares in the spherical network in accordance with the principles of the circle, the 360 degrees. You've thrown the network on the sky. It isn't really there, see? Then to help you a little further, pick out some of the big stars and see if they make a shape. You know, this is like doing a Rorschach test. And you see, oh, look, there's one over there that looks like a dipper. Or some people call it a plough. And there's one there that looks like a cross. And there's one there that, by some extreme wangling, can be made to look like a virgin. And all these lines that join the constellations together are our ways of projecting a pattern upon this great and glorious confusion so that we can remember it and chart it. But obviously, you can very well see that if you looked at this same pattern of stars from some completely different position in space, all those constellations and their arrangements would vanish. And you would have to invent a new one. Because there is nowhere where the stars really are. It depends where you're looking from. So in this sense, then, man in nature, with his extraordinary symmetrical brain and its amazing complications, figures it out. And it's man who introduces the law into the world. He invents it. But in a way, invenire, to invent, is to discover. But what we discover, in a way, is not something that's out there. When we invent the laws of nature, we are discovering something about ourselves and our own passion for prediction, for regularity, for keeping things under control. Therefore, there has to be a law.